Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school-age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Adventurous Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland, and you're really welcome back to this new season of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast. Our series on outdoor play last year in 2023 was really popular. So for the first series of 2024, we decided to take a deeper look at one particular aspect of outdoor play that we touched on in the previous series. And it also featured in the Early Childhood Ireland Valuing Outdoor Play event, which was held last March. Professor Ellen Beta Sandsetter, who spoke at that conference, discussed the topic of risky and thrilling play. Scary funny is the term she uses to describe it. So over the next couple of episodes, we're going to explore that more. We're going to look at why we should embrace risky or adventurous play, how we can do that, and we're going to look at two very specific examples of thrilling or adventurous play, that of using real tools and fire, exploring fire with children. So my first guest for this series is my Early Childhood Ireland colleague, Chloe Keegan. You've heard Chloe speaking on the podcast before. She's an early childhood specialist at Early Childhood Ireland with a special focus on nature pedagogy and outdoor play. She's currently completing her PhD at Maynooth University. Her motivations focus on children's rights, particularly children's participation rights, and the need for children's voices to be heard and implemented authentically in policy and in legislation. She's passionate about nature pedagogy, sustainability, and superhero-themed play. So, Chloe, thank you for coming back.
No problem. I'm delighted to come back, and I thought we could hit the ground running with 2024 because it's such a successful 2023.
Well, hopefully 24 will be as good, if not better. So, I suppose before we get into the kind of start to drill into the adventurous and risky play topic, there in your bio, I mentioned nature pedagogy, and I know you were involved last year in the running of a nature pedagogy CPD program with Early Childhood Ireland. So can you tell us a little bit more about what nature pedagogy is? Is it another term for outdoor play, or does nature pedagogy extend indoors as well as outdoors?
Yeah, so nature pedagogy can, of course, be related with outdoors, but not always. It's more connecting with nature, regardless of the access you have outdoors. Last year in November, I was invited to speak at the Wicklow Childcare Committee Childcare Professional Day, and that all centred around the fact that nature connection can happen indoors. And ironically, that arena was in a hotel where we had no windows and no open doors. So it was very interesting because as I'm talking about how we can connect with nature, you could feel the room kind of drain because we had that lack of fresh air and lack of natural light. So it was interesting because we almost did this unplanned experiment where we opened the exit door and everyone just felt so much lighter. So it actually proved my point that you can connect with nature indoors. If indoors becomes very stifling, it's as simple as looking out the window, looking at the sky, opening a window. It even can stimulate you if you have pictures of natural scenes on your desktop. So it's just almost a reminder for yourself that when you're indoors, just because you have concrete walls around you doesn't mean that you can't connect with nature, but you can do it in ways that you feel that you exist in a live world. Another part that I actually talked about with the nature pedagogy was that debate between artificial plants and using real plants. And it was interesting because research was done on it, but it was done for context of waiting rooms in nursing homes. And they found that the nursing home waiting rooms that had no plants, no anything, they had less, I suppose you'd say, positive mental health relating to nature overall because they just felt very stifled. There was a comparison then to the other waiting room that had just artificial plants, just one at a doorway and one tiny pot on a windowsill, and they actually recorded better well-being. just for those figures. So it shows that if you're someone that's not green fingered or someone that's not into planting or things like that, it shouldn't limit children's opportunities to connect with nature, because you can do it in ways that are very less kind of challenging, but also very meaningful, like that the artificial plants and play areas. I think the most impactful part of that event was the fact that we brought in grounding boxes. You might have seen them on the social media. So because we were in an indoor space, I thought we need to connect with nature indoors. And we provided boxes that had dry leaves, seashells, seaweed, and attendees were encouraged to take off their shoes, take off their socks, and walk on all these materials. Of course, very hesitant initially, but afterwards you could not get them out. So it was very good to have.
And I suppose, I remember you mentioning about, and I was surprised at it in our last episode when you said about artificial plants being better than no plants. And a couple of people mentioned that to me, that they were surprised by that finding as well. So it's interesting. But so nature pedagogy is kind of maybe even at its most basic is maybe a starting point for what we're going to talk a bit more about today, which is kind of what we used to call risky play, but I suppose because risk implies a lot of danger or hazards or whatever, we're kind of using the term adventurous play or thrilling play more now. But can you give us a definition of what that is? I know Ellen Beatus Ansetters has a list of kind of 6 or 8 factors that make play scary, funny. Can you take us through, even not all of them, some of them, to kind of differentiate, to move us way on past the artificial plants?
So she would talk a lot in detail about the need for children to experience challenging heights, fast-paced speeds, use real tools, have opportunities to hide without any adult knowing where they are. In a metaphorical sense, you can have children that feel that they are hidden, but you know where they are. And then also engaging with the fire experiences. So with that risk, it's not necessarily what the actual experience is for the child, but it's what sense it gives them. It's the fact that they feel that they're being challenged. I know Nikki Buchan defines it as just developing life skills, because being able to risk assess environments yourself is a skill that's always needed. But if you're always being told how to assess risk by somebody else, you become very dependent. So I think that's what's factoring into it, is these risky experiences may not be risky to you, but they may be really meaningful to the child, or vice versa. They might be very terrifying to you, but to the child it might be very simple. And it's that sense of experiencing thrill or experiencing excitement that Ellen talks about is the major part, is the fact that you want them to experience those. And by limiting risk, we're actually denying them opportunities to experience those emotions.
We'll come to the how to in a second, but there is a bit there, isn't there, about, as educators, kind of biting your tongue on the be careful, don't do that, careful you don't fall, these kinds of things that, because we want to keep children safe, tend to trip off our tongues very easily. And it is, I suppose, seeing children, we talk a lot about children being competent and confident and capable. And I suppose it goes back to some of what we spoke about in previous episodes of our image of the child, and how genuinely seeing the children as competent and trusting them. I mean, you've mentioned some of why it's important that, it gives children the opportunity to develop life skills, and that, can you take us through more of, why we need to kind of embrace it more? And I suppose, I know you want to mention too some of the recent developments in Ireland that have made it maybe easier to do it, less challenging from a maybe policy point of view, in terms of, what settings can do.
Yeah, so I think it's firstly important to understand where risk culture kind of came from for play first, because we need to understand, why are we so afraid? So the big factor comes from, and I've done a bit of research in this, it's very interesting to hear the different kind of reasonings or beliefs of why people believe we're in such a fear-based culture. And there was some research to actually link it to millennials. So anyone that was born after 1982 to 1995 apparently were the most protected generation of children in history. So it's interesting because they become the future parents, and the way they parent is obviously going to echo their childhood experiences. So that was really interesting to see that research was looking at, well, how those children were so protected is now influencing the culture of fear, but also the culture of risk nowadays. As you can understand with that extension, then if you grow into a parent or just in a role model in children's lives, you're going to echo that cotton wool culture that you grew up in. So there, they believe, is where we kind of developed this helicopter parenting, or where we became justified in micromanaging children's lives. Interesting enough, though, Maura, I came across it today knowing I was doing the podcast. Have you ever heard of tiger parenting?
Yes, yeah. That's where even up to third level parents will argue with lecturers over their children's points and fighting like a tiger for their for their children, which is, I suppose, the next stage on from the helicoptering of younger children.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a massive factor, and that's going to echo into how children perceive themselves as being able to control their lives, but also manage risk on their own or become independent. But there's other factors as well to consider, is the fact that we are in a female-dominated sector. So there is a lot of research and discussions and theory around how, I don't know if this is still relevant as much, but that idea that boys are more physically active than girls and girls aren't as physically active. I would challenge that a little bit, but I do know that there is a link between female educators and how they interact with boys and girls, and the fact that they would encourage a certain expectation of behaviour that would be very more passive compared to, say, an adult male. And that actually comes from the fact that males and females see aggressive behaviour differently. So, for example, in rough and tumble play, a male...
Going to say that there's a lot about that in relation to rough and tumble play. Yeah.
So that really is a factor in the way that we are a completely female dominated sector. So unknown to ourselves, we just naturally go for the caring, nurturing aspect that seeks for safety. Whereas a male may look at play that's rough and tumble and think, well, that's absolutely fine. We might be terrified. It just depends on the person. Now, that's not to say males and females are directly that distinct. I was very much a boisterous type educator in terms of the play, but it depends on the person. But I do think the common denominator, and you touched on it already, Maura, is the fact that we do have an increase in regulation in our sector. But what that also matches is the fact that we now have this adult sense of increased responsibility. And because of that increased responsibility, I think some people feel that sensitivity and that role, that they end up overprotecting children, not realising that has massive implications for their learning, their experiences, and overall their development in general for long-term experiences. I mean, I did a presentation a few years ago and it was about superhero play, but it's very relevant to here. It was the fact that what happens if you tell a child who loves Batman that you can't be Batman? Or you tell a child that they can't climb a tree because it's unsafe. What happens? Like, what is the repercussions of that? So one of the major things is the fact that we know children are active learners, but they seek out being heard, to be valued, and they want to be able to do things for themselves. So if they're constantly being told what to do, they struggle with those restrictions being placed on them. And the implication with that is they actually bring their play underground. So underground play is something that can be quite detrimental in terms of learning environments, because they learn to hide their play. They know they have this drive to seek more, maybe movement or challenge or something that they just know they want, but they know that they're not allowed in that environment because they may get punished or whatever the repercussion may be. So they hide it, and all they learn in those moments is how to be deceitful, how to lie, and they also lose trust in authority figures, and that can be very negative when you grow up with that feeling, because children want to feel that they can trust their world, and if they don't have that trust on the experiences they have, that's going to have an impact then later on in life. So I think those all play into a factor, but it's massively influencing now, and it's to do with my own PhD research, is the way we approach risky play and the challenges that children experience. If we're limiting it all the time, it's also massively implicating the power dynamics we have between adults and children. And I'm finding that it's hugely interfering with children's participatory rights, because how can they actively decide for themselves or actively choose for themselves if they're constantly being told what to do?
And I suppose there's trust as well that, that as children get older, they want to kind of test their boundaries and they need to be trusted to do that. Going back to the life skills, I've often said, isn't it better to teach a toddler how to manage stairs than banning them from the stairs? Because stairs are a fact of life. And you're better off being able to tackle stairs safely than suddenly finding yourself unsupervised at the top of a flight of stairs when you're 6.
Yeah, because I think
being a bit provocative, but when you don't know what to do. So it's giving children that sense that they can be trusted. I'm smiling too at the play going underground. Many years ago when I had my own setting. The A-Team was a very popular TV program, and a parent came into me one day and said that her child was having bad dreams about Mr. T, I think. And I had seen some quite aggressive play going on, and I kind of said, okay, that's it. I was young and naive and not very reflective, and I said, that's it, I'm banning it. So said to the children, we weren't going to have any more of that kind of play here one day. And about a week later, was passing a table, and I heard a rustling under the table. 4 of the boys under the table, organising who was going to be who, but they were literally underground in case.
That's amazing. But that's exactly
that. And the guy who was doing the most organising was the guy whose mom had come into me and said he was afraid. He might have been having a scary dream, but it wasn't necessarily that he was very afraid. That's a really good point, that you can kind of talk about hurting people or getting hurt, rather than, outright banning isn't effective.
And you made a good point as well, is the fact that that's the boy whose parent is most proactive in limiting his play. But that's because he's trying to work through his experiences. So he experiences those bad dreams. He needs to use play to work that out for himself and explore those themes that he's struggling with in action. So if he's being denied those opportunities, it's actually going to make him more fearful because he doesn't know how to process them.
Exactly. So they're really good discussion there on the benefits of it and why we need to, I suppose, challenge ourselves to accept and provide for more challenge. But we all know that we're in a broader sector, and TUSLA brought out guidance last year, and there have been developments on the insurance front. You want us to take us through some of those and the positive impact that can have on educators who want to up the level of adventurous play in their settings?
Yeah, so you'll know more about this than I will more, but obviously Early Childhood Ireland's been advocating for change in insurance for years. And it was great that I was able to be a part of that experience last year in March when the insurance was changed, where they removed a restrictive statement that said, look, tools are not permitted and won't be covered by insurance if there is an accident or an incident. So that's removed. So it gives that freedom for practitioners and educators to know, okay, so I can use tools. But the issue with that is now we're in kind of a limbo, because it's like, right, we can use tools, but I don't know how to go about it because I've been told for years that I can't. So that issue is the gap in practice, is because our theory has always been told, no, we can't, even though in ourselves we believe it. And that's where when The Roof is the Sky was published by TUSLA, it was just so groundbreaking, because a lot of the members that I would have talked to on my on-site visits, of course, would have been fearful if I came in and said, well, of course you can use tools, or you can experience with fire and things like that. And they would look at me and go, do you know inspectors? Do you know our system? And I would laugh and I say, I do. They are so open to these challenging experiences for children. They are coming from the same lens that they want to ensure that children are learning the best possible experiences that they can and meaning making in their play. All they're prioritizing is the fact that children are doing it and you are aware that they're safe. That's all they want to make sure of. So I love the fact that when The Roof is a Sky came out, it really highlighted that TUSLA are really advocating for risk and adventure and pushing those boundaries, but doing it in a way that educators are they're very empowered by the fact that there are boundaries there, without limiting the meaning of play in those. So when The Roof is a Sky started to talk about things like sleeping outdoors, using real tools, fire, I think it opened a lot of people's eyes to realise that this was something that they could really do. But the issue, as I said, is the fact that now we have a guidance that says you can go off and do all these things, but now we have educators going, but what can I actually do? There is still that fear that we have to dismantle.
Of course. And risk assessments are so important, and understanding the difference between a hazard and a risk. I've often said, if you know there's a branch on a tree rotten, you're exposing a child to a hazard. But if you know every branch on a tree is sound and there's nothing sharp on the ground underneath, then you're giving children the opportunity to climb a tree knowing that hazards are removed, and the child can then develop their competence as much as they want, because children are different. I mean, there's some children naturally risk averse and others then are risk takers. And it's, knowing your children too.
It's so true, because that's what Nikki Buchan talked to us about in the nature pedagogy program that we did last summer, where she talked about the dynamic risk assessment. So what you're saying, Maura, is as in you risk assess there and then, because the thing with risk, and I think that's the discomfort with people, is it can't always be planned. So it can be very spontaneous and in the moment. And I think we've become very reliant on the regulation requirements and documentation, that we've also overly done it for ourselves when it's not necessary. So I remember having discussions with TUSA relating to some clarifications for when The Roof is a Sky. And I did ask about risk assessment. And one thing they said was, look, if you're doing fire or tools for the first time, you need to develop a very detailed risk assessment, something that whether it's a policy or a tool, that all educators are working from the same protocol. But it doesn't need to be filled out every time fire or tools is being done. It just becomes like your regular practice. It's the fact that they want to ensure that you've proven that you've thought of everything, but you can't think of everything all the time. And that's the thing with risk, is you need to be prepared to go in and be ready to go, okay, well, something has just happened here. I didn't foresee it. The children didn't foresee it, but we'll learn from it. So not only are children risk assessing and learning that skill themselves, but we're also teaching educators how to be pro-risk. So being pro-risk as an educator is something that we also need to develop as a skill, while we're ensuring children engage in these challenging experiences.
And I know, it's something that we will be coming back to with, you've mentioned Nikki Buchan, and I'm delighted that she's going to be a guest on an episode, and we're going
fabulous.
to tease out more of the day-to-day implications and hows of using real tools and so on. I know you spoke at Asira about outdoors and risk and so on, and you have an exciting engagement coming up soon, I know, as well. So do you want to talk a little bit about how we're sharing our knowledge with kind of the broader early years community, even outside the country?
Yeah, so Asira, that was my first time presenting at an international conference, and it was amazing because everyone was so energized and eager to explore, and it was based on participation and curiosity and wonder. So my proposal was about this observational study that I did in a setting that had established a real tools area. They had real tools there, like hammers and nails and pieces of wood children could work with. But with my observational study, it was able to highlight not only the negatives, but the positives that were coming from the fact that they were engaging in this practice for the first time. In my presentation, I think people were really awestruck by the fact that I witnessed a power drill in the real tools area, but it had no batteries. And all that happened was the children got so frustrated, and it was really hard to watch, because the children just started to realize that this tool doesn't work. This is causing me anxiety, and now I'm no longer enjoying my experience. So while the adult obviously deliberately made sure that that power tool had no batteries, it ended up causing the child to experience this, what should be very exciting time, to be very confusing and something that they didn't want to engage in future. So it's the fact that experience gave children a negative start is something that we have to be aware of, that if we're doing something, we have to make sure that our reasons for design are purposeful. Another thing that was really important was the fact that the adults were very clearly working from a fear-based approach, because they would sit by the tool area, understandably, because it's their first time, but they would only provide access to the tools when they wanted to, not when the children wanted to. So there would have been maybe days or weeks that went by when the tools were just locked away in a shed, and you would have maybe the odd one or two children who said, I want to try the hammer, or I want to try the saw, but the educator wasn't up to facilitating that, because there's so much in that job. So it also limited children's motivations to want to do it, because they were hearing no more often than they were hearing yes. But the benefits of it was the fact that, firstly, child-sized tools exist. So there are tools that are deliberately designed for children to use. And also the fact that children are very eager and capable to use tools in a safe way. I think the biggest thing that the observational study showed was the fact that educators need to have a purpose for the tools. Firstly, they can use it if it's to learn a life skill, for example, how to use a hacksaw or how to use a hammer, and the safety aspects around that. But then what happens? So the issue with that study was they had no further plan. After the child had gained the skills in hammering and sawing, etc., there wasn't any further development. So the children's learning kind of wasted away. So I think it's really important that educators themselves learn, okay, well, how can we learn? Maybe do we make a birdhouse? Do we make a table? What do we do? What's the purpose of now having this life skill, and how can we put it into practice?
So you mentioned about, the plan. So the tools were introduced, and kind of it kind of fizzled out in a way because there wasn't a plan. So would you, and we will, in another episode, I mentioned we'll be talking to Nikki Buchan, and we'll also be talking to an educator who has done this process, and we'll tease it out more. But just as you mentioned it there, Chloe, before tools are introduced, should there be kind of nearly a year-long, even, I suppose, a process of orientation for the educators around the use of the tools themselves, and then where the skills that the children will develop should go, like maybe a birdhouse or something like that?
I would actually be hesitant on saying it needs to be a year-long plan or that long of a plan, because you might find that your cohort of children don't have any interest, and you've gone into all this effort of planning tools and planning these skills for yourself, and children just don't want to engage in it. So I wouldn't say that educators need to put that pressure on themselves to go off and do these trainings and all these things. I think what they need to do is realize that they themselves are learners with the children, and to not be afraid to be unknowing. I think we're very used to being the adult needs to know everything and the adult needs to have all the answers. And I don't think that's fair. I think if you're willing to reflect on your relationship at risk and be very open to the child and say, okay, well, we've learned everything that I know. Let me go away and find something else that we can do, and we'll come back and then we'll figure out a project together. I think that would be a much better approach, rather than planning long term. But it would also mean that children are able to partake in that learning and developing their own environments and play while they're participating, instead of just constantly being funneled that knowledge. I also think it's great because children get to see the adult being vulnerable. I think it's very important for them to see fear exists in adults. We're not always, we don't know the answer for everything. And I think being able to say to a child, I don't know, or okay, this action is making me a little bit afraid. And then the child might wonder, well, why? And it creates an awful lot more honest communication that I think I don't know whether it's fearful or hesitant to engage in, but I think it's feeding into that power dynamic where we are separating from children, when really what we need to be doing is merging with them and realizing we as educators, we as adults are also learners in real tools or fire or adventurous play, and children are learners too. So being able to see that we both have that common interest is a great starting point. I think that would be a much better approach.
Okay, that's good. It also strikes me, listening to you, that it could be a very valuable opportunity to engage with parents, because
yes,
parents could well have more expertise in the area of using real tools, and wouldn't it be lovely for children to see their mommy or daddy coming in, sharing their expertise and knowledge as well.
This is why I think it's so funny that, I know, say, Liz that works with us she laughs at me an awful lot, because she's like, you're always on about fire, or you're always on about tools, or, that's kind of my interest area. But my dad was a carpenter. But it's funny because I'm nearly embarrassed to say I don't know how to hammer anything or screw drive anything. And that's because my mom was very much a helicopter parent. So she would, obviously my dad he's an expert in his field, and we would be able to watch him work from a distance, but at no point would we be allowed to go near him, his tools or anything else. So we kind of grew up with this, I'm not going to say it was a fear, but it was this underlying curiosity that we were never allowed to explore. So I think now as a 31-year-old adult, I'm going, Mom, I am now an adult, let me go play with tools. But I think it's something that we need to be aware of is that in inviting of parents is so important. And the fact that they will have different upbringings than us. They will have different versions of what does risk mean. I mean, you might have someone that hears risky play and automatically goes to litigation or injury. So if you have a cohort of parents that find that the word risk is very problematic, there's nothing wrong with having a meeting where you provide new meaning to terms that actually suit your setting. So if parents and educators are more empowered by it, the word adventure play or challenging play or just play, then you might find that they become less fearful and just more curious. So I think involving parents is huge, because you need to know where their boundaries are as well, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be coming at your door and wondering, okay, well, what's happening today? You don't want to leave a parent feeling anxious. Same with colleagues. So I think an opportunity to collaborate together would be really important.
Great. So I know I kind of stepped in a bit there with some of that. You were about to say about another conference experience that you have.
Oh yes, good reminder. So it was great actually, Maura, because the ASERA presentation was so unique, and it was promoting where Ireland is in terms of our position for real tools, and the fact that we are quite behind in comparison to international countries, say like Norway and Sweden. But it was interesting because in the audience, we had the question and answer period, and out of the 3 talks, the question and answers were completely on my talk. I think it was because it was just so random, I suppose. I don't know what the curious part was, but we had a director from the Early Childhood Development Association of Malta, and she came up to speak with me, and she was fascinated because she said, Chloe, we are the exact same as Ireland in Malta. We are experiencing the exact same fear-based culture. We know that tools and fire and challenging experiences is vital for children, but we don't know how to go about it. So I was invited then to speak on behalf of Early Childhood Ireland for this organisation. And it's great because not only is it networking for Early Childhood Ireland and Ireland itself, but it's us realising that we're not in isolation of where we are. We're not the only country that's behind, but just because we're behind doesn't mean that we can't learn. And the fact that Malta is on this similar learning journey was very insightful for me, because otherwise I didn't know that Malta would be in the same cultural space as us. I think the fact that they're so eager to learn as well will be great, because say, for example, Malta then go off and develop their own frameworks and their own forms of practice. It allows us then in Ireland to learn too, so we can learn together.
And yeah, I mean, you say we're behind other countries, but by virtue of the fact that, you know, we're speaking about our experiences, we're also leading the way for others, mm-hmm. which is really good. So so that's later in January. It's a remote presentation, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's on the 25th of January. I have information about it on my LinkedIn if anyone's interested, and it's going to be centering on the observational study that I did, and also the using real tools and fire in practice, and kind of the limitations and what forward, like what's the first step. Kind of similar things I've talked about here, so it's not like it's unknown knowledge.
Okay. Well, the best of luck with that, and I'm really looking forward to teasing out this area in the coming episodes, and thank you for getting the ball rolling and kind of piquing our interest on it. So thanks so much, Chloe.
No problem, Maura. Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.